Hello, Teacher9 here with another Topic of the Week video. This week I'll be talking about sequels and reboots. Now I've talked about reboots a bit before, but there's a couple of specific things I do want to talk about here, and as well as, talking about sequels. This week's topic was submitted by YouTube user MiraculousWolf17, and their topic is: what makes a good sequel/reboot, and what are some examples of good ones as a topic video? Alright, so let me talk about sequels first. Now, when you're doing a sequel, I'll be talking about some movies. But when you're doing a sequel, you have to pay attention to what was good about the original and what people liked, and you have to work on that. Make what was good better and fix what didn't work in the original. Let me take a couple movies that I actually really like. Rush Hour movies. Rush Hour 1 is a great movie. I love Rush Hour 1. It's not perfect, but it's still great, and it has some iconic lines. Some jokes that, are still I'll still quote to this day. But Rush Hour 2, I feel, is a better movie. It takes all the stuff that I liked about the first movie, the friendship and the bond between Lee and Carter, the fight scenes, the jokes, and, you had, the story, and you take all of that and they work on making a bit of a better balance. You'll notice this watching these movies back to back, that Rush Hour 1 is a bit more serious. And it has some jokes sprinkled in, but they're not really as common as you probably would have remembered, because I remember when I remember a lot of funny lines, and then I was thinking, and I rewatched it, I'm like, this isn't nearly as much of a funny, comedy as I remember. It's an action comedy, it's a lot of action and story, and has comedy in it. But Rush Hour 2, and I think I said this in my review of Rush Hour 2, that it balances things out a bit better. It has a little more comedy, you still have a good story, and it still keeps what made the original good. You have the friendship between Lee and Carter, you have the action, you have some fantastic fight scenes in this movie that I still, some of the best fight scenes in the Rush Hour trilogy are in Rush Hour 2. And you still have a good story that sort of delves into Lee's backstory. So you have all this, along with, a lot of interesting characters in a story that I feel I actually like a little bit more than the story from the first movie. So this is an important, example of, you take what was good and what people liked and you work on it and you basically make a better movie. And it's an important aspect. You have to take what people can. This is also important for reboots as well, and I'll get into that. You take what people liked and you keep that, and you take what didn't work and you fix it. You would think that this would just be common sense, but sometimes, especially when you see a lot of, sequel after sequels getting pumped out, particularly in the Fast and the Furious movies, where they just kind of gets, why should I care if you're just pumping out a bunch of movies? And you see this with some of the, especially newer Transformers movies, and it's just like, okay, we get it. But, it's important to note. Now, let me talk two different examples here. Now, there's one here that is about doing a movie that's very similar. You basically have two heist movies. I love Ocean's 11, I love Ocean's 12, and I actually really like Ocean's 13. This is one of the few times where I say that the trilogy, I actually really like all three parts of a trilogy, which is actually not very common, especially because there's always something that, even in the Rush Hour trilogy, Rush Hour 3 is not as good as, Rush Hour 2, but for the Ocean's movies, I really like these. They're very similar in, their approach to things and how they build the movies and what they do with the characters. It's still very similar but entertaining because of what they change. They present you with a new story, with a new heist, and that's the main thing about these movies. They're heist movies. This is a heist movie about stealing money. Ocean's 12 is another heist movie, which of course is what people liked about this one. But it basically says, alright, we get the gang back together and do another heist. It's still another heist movie. It's a sequel that does something very similarly, but considering all the circumstances are different, and the characters are different, and what they're stealing is different, and the whole situation is different, it presents the audience with a new scenario that people will still find entertaining, even if you've already watched this movie. It's not like something like The Force Awakens, which is literally just copy-pasting, A New Hope. This is still taking a similar concept and just doing it in a different way. It's very similar, but it's still entertaining and something that people still like. Now, to go to a bit of on the different side, something that's different, I love Casino Royale. And Casino Royale is rightfully considered one of the best, if not the best, Bond movies ever made. It was a fantastic and a complete shake-up to the Bond franchise, in a good way. Quantum of Solace came out, and some people had issues with Quantum of Solace, and it's a very different movie. Now, it's not bad, and I actually really like Quantum of Solace. I think a lot of people don't appreciate it as much. But it's definitely more action-focused than Quantum of Solace was. Quantum of Solace was a longer, more methodical movie. It had a lot of build-up. It had a lot of the spy thriller stuff. And that stuff is in Quantum of Solace, but there is definitely more of a lean towards action. But that's okay. It still has the heart of what made Casino Royale entertaining, and it's building on what happened in Casino Royale with the whole plotline involving Quantum, if only Skyfall and Spectre didn't completely screw this up. But it still takes something that you liked, and it built on that in a different way. It just gave it a bit of a different spin. And while this may not appeal to everyone, and I'm totally fine if someone says, I like Quantum of Solace, or I liked Casino Royale, but I wasn't a big fan of Quantum of Solace, that's fine. Everyone's got their own personal tastes. But I still think that Quantum of Solace is a good and entertaining movie. It's just different from its predecessor. But not different in a way that's like completely destroying everything, because you still have the stuff involving Vesper, you still have all of the stuff that happened in Quantum of Solace, or in Casino Royale, affects Bond in Quantum of Solace, and you actually see how that affects him, and even, you see his character with Camille and, and Fields, and you see how what affected him in here, and how this, changed him in this, so he is a bit of a different character, but it makes sense. But he's not like completely fundamentally different, and you see that he's still got the Bond. This is still the Bond from this movie is in this movie, and I do think that some people may not appreciate it as much. But when it comes to making a sequel, this is doing something different in a way that is still entertaining. You still have the stuff involving Bond. You still have some of the emotional stuff. You still have the trauma that Bond experienced, and you see how things affect Bond. And it's also providing entertaining action. There's more action in the movie, at least in terms of ratio to the quiet stuff, to Quantum of Solace, which is it's a longer movie and is definitely on the more slow side in terms of its build-up. But this is a case where I'd say different is not bad. It's just different. Now, I know I kind of went through all those. Now, when you're doing a sequel, it is important to understand why people like stuff in the first place. You don't completely change everything and then expect people to just be, to just go with it like, yay, you changed everything that I liked into stuff I don't like. And it's also important to not just copy-paste, because you do see that, that complaint brought up with some sequels where it's just the same thing. You have to do something like the Ocean's movies. It's still a heist movie, it's still the same group of characters, but they change it up a bit, just enough where they're not straying too far from the actual original formula that made the first one great, but it's not just rehashing it. They do work things around a little bit so that it's still an entertaining movie. And it's something I feel like too many studios just don't quite understand, that when you're making sequels, you have to make something, you have to strive to make something better. It may not be better, but you have to strive to do something better. Try to do something good. And try to do something that's respectful to the audience and respectful to the franchise that you're dealing with. Now, to move on to reboots. I've talked about reboots several times before, but there's a couple things that I really want to talk about. Two good examples and a bad example. The Voltron Legendary Defender show on Netflix is probably what I would consider one of the best reboots we've seen in years. It takes what was a redub and re-edit of an anime that was really cheesy. Like, it could be... I've watched a bit of the old Voltron, and it's aged, to say the least. So, it's great to see Voltron take what people like. You take these characters and the base, like, these ideas in the story. And it's funny because the story in the original Japanese is different from the one in the original Go line, is different from Voltron. but they change things up and they make things different. And this is definitely, like, a lot of people misunderstand me when I say stuff, when I have issues with things like Thundercats Roar, which I will talk about in a bit. It's not that it's different, it's that it's different in a bad way. Voltron Legendary Defender is very different. I've looked back at some of the old stuff, and they make references to stuff, like, shoot, Shiro's death in the original Go Lion is referenced in Voltron Legendary Defender in an alternate universe that references the weird accent that Sven, who is Shiro's counterpart in the Voltron, what Sven had in, Voltron. And it's so funny looking at Voltron Legendary Defender and seeing the homages that it makes to both the original anime and the American version. And it basically does its own thing. It builds its own story and it builds its own mythos around these old concepts. It revitalizes all this stuff, and it takes what was, the Voltron. I've watched it. Some of it's really just kind of lackluster, to say the least. But it's taking something and it's making it great. And as far as Voltron has aired thus far, it's been consistently good. There's a solid story, which of course you expect that when you have, Avatar: The Last Airbender veteran writers, in charge of writing it. But, and I know Angelman and I talked a lot about this in our Voltron topic. We talked about that for 3.5 hours, so I won't go too in depth into this. But that's an example of a good reboot that it takes what was good. It takes the things that people liked, and it modernizes it, and it makes it less... Is cringy the word? Maybe not. It's less cheesy and less... weird. It gives it better production values. I think that's a good way to put it. It has better production values. It has better writing. But it's definitely made with love and passion. And when you're doing a reboot, and you're doing a sequel too, you have to have passion for the source material. Or even if you don't, you do have to actually have respect for it. Even if you don't particularly care about it. Like, even if someone came in and they didn't really like Voltron, the original Voltron, you can't just say, oh, well, I hate it, so I'm just going to, I hate all of this. No. You do have to say, okay, I don't like it, but there are people who do, so when I'm writing a reboot, I can't just piss on all of it. But, you do have people who are, in charge of the Voltron Legendary Defender that did like the show, the original show. So the love for that really comes through with this, but they've recognized that, yeah, this stuff isn't as good as it could have been. So let's make it better. Let's strive to be better. Let's give a more interesting story. Let's give the characters more development. Let's give the universe more, a bit more, interest. And let's actually create an interesting story out of the stuff that we liked before, but kind of lacked in some ways. The DuckTales reboot is another great one, and I'm not saying that DuckTales was bad. I loved DuckTales growing up, like a lot of people. But, when you're doing a reboot, it doesn't matter if the original... And I just think this is another important thing to talk about. It doesn't matter. Like, you can still reboot stuff that was good, or stuff that was, at the very least, entertaining and liked, and still do good. And you can actually see this with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles franchise. There have been numerous cartoons. Like, I specifically grew up with the 80s version, and then later on with the 2003 series, which still is one of my favorites. But, people like the 80s cartoon. Well, then you have the 2003 cartoon, which reboots it. And then you had the 2007 movie, which is it's essentially a reboot. It's its own continuity. And then you have, the more modern live action movies, which is its own thing and it's still good. Then you have the 2012 cartoon, which was entertaining and good. It had some problems, and I actually never got around to finishing that. But you have these different reboots, and they're all very different from each other. But they're still good and entertaining. As long as you're doing something good, it doesn't matter if you're rebooting something, because you have all these other things that people did like, and you can make something good. And that's the case with the DuckTales cartoon. the new DuckTales cartoon. A lot of people love DuckTales. Love DuckTales. I grew up with DuckTales too. DuckTales, Darkwing Duck, and all stuff like that. So when you're rebooting it, you do have to make it good, and it actually is really good, and it makes me want to watch it every week. It's important. You have to make people care about the show. It does have a different take than what the original did. It does actually have a very, very different take on stuff, and it does take a different approach to a lot of things. You do actually have some ongoing storylines here that, I mean, shoot, as far as the show's gone thus far, a lot of stuff that was introduced fairly early on hasn't really been completely resolved. We're still in the middle of that mystery. And it's doing more than what the original did, and it's doing things differently, but it's different in a good way. And this is a lot of things with reboots. You know, when you're rebooting something, you can't just hash out the same thing that was done before, and it has to be different, but it also has to be good. And the DuckTales cartoon is very good, and it's something that people love. People love this new stuff. We love the new versions of the characters. They've done things like making Huey, Dewey, and Louie distinct. They wear slightly different outfits. They have very different personalities, and they all work well with each other. Webby has an actual, real, more developed personality. We get more with Scrooge, who's played by David Tennant, which is fantastic. And you have great writing and great entertaining episodes, along with, you have the adventure, you have the family stuff, and you have Donald actually in this a lot more than he was in the original series, which is great, because this is Donald freaking Duck here. So, you can tell there's care for what was done before, but we're going to be doing our own thing, and we're going to be doing it good. And it doesn't drop what was great about the original DuckTales. It takes and it retains what people liked, and it improves on things, and even things that are very different. It still actually does its own thing, and it's still very entertaining. And I won't get into this because there's actually some spoilers, that I don't want to spoil the show, because I would just recommend to watch it because it's great. But that's how you do a show. It's different. Its art style is different, so a lot of people were a little put off from it at first. But it still ended up being a very good show that is still respectful to its source material and the original comics as well too, that the DuckTales did come from. But it shows a real consistent it shows a strive to be good. And this is one thing I mentioned earlier. You have to strive to be good. You have to strive to do better. And it's always important. You can't just rest in your laurels and say, we're rebooting something that people liked before, so people will just watch it, whatever. No. You can't just do that, because that's just a slap in the face. You do have to respect your audience, and you have to respect the fans who are original fans when you're making a reboot, because, you're making a reboot to get those people back along with a new audience. And I'm not going to be diving too deeply into this, but I do want to talk about Thundercats Roar a bit. Thundercats Roar is literally the antithesis of all of this. This is, hey, you know what made the original good? Let's do something totally different. You know the art style that people didn't like before? And even if the 80s show didn't have the greatest animation, that's no excuse to have the wonky, sort of ugly, smushed, rubbery, weird animation and art style that Thundercats Roar has. And despite the fact that they talk about action, you have all of this goofy, wacky gag comedy that is so removed from Thundercats is that it's so obviously trying to pander to the Teen Titans Go crowd that it's just transparent. It's just a cash grab. And no one's mad. No one's mad that Thundercats Roar is different. And I said this in my video, my rant video, that no one's mad that it's comedic. And if this show existed alongside something like the 2011 show, no one really would have as much of a problem. But it feels like they're like, hey guys, you want Thundercats again? Well, now it's like Teen Titans Go, so you'll only like it if you're a little kid. There's no respect for Thundercats. And yeah, and a lot of people are saying, well, the old show was bad, so this can be bad too. No, because if you look at Voltron, the original Voltron can be painful to watch at times because, wow, it had some bad voice acting, it had some really goofy writing at times, and it was just overall ridiculous. But Voltron Legendary Defender took that and said, hey, what if we made this better? And it's experienced a lot of success. Thundercats Roar is like, hey, any of the issues that the original series had? Let's just ignore the 2011 show. The issues the original series had? And let's not even really try. And why would you even be doing this? I mean, okay, I know. They're trying to cash in on the Thundercats nostalgia. And they're just trying to get people in and trying to bait people with the Thundercats logo. But when you're not even respecting the franchise, when you're not respecting the original, you're not respecting the audience who cares about the original, and you're just making some weird copycat Teen Titans Go that looks a lot like, Steven Universe, which, you're very clearly not trying. Like, I don't even mind that the art style is a little more goofy, and I don't think anyone really minds that in and of itself, because you can have something that has some goofy art style stuff and still have a good story. Teen Titans, the original Teen Titans, had some really goofy stuff in it in terms of its animation, very anime-esque, but it still had a lot of serious stuff, a lot of serious stories in it. And it still had, great writing. Not great in every part, but still had a lot of stuff that people really loved. The Trigun arc, the Terra arc, stuff with Slade. You had all that stuff that was still really interesting. And in a style that can work for that. And if Teen Titans Go wanted to have a bit more cartoonish, a little more easier to draw, that's fine. In fact, let me talk about this. I need to talk about this for a second. Spectacular Spider-Man has a bit more of a cartoonish, more easier to draw art style. And I remember seeing it said that it was specifically drawn and animated that way to make it easier to animate. But Spectacular Spider-Man still had good writing, good characters, and, solid passion behind it. You can tell that Greg Weisman wanted to make a good show. You can tell there's a lot of passion that went into Spectacular Spider-Man until it was canceled. On a cliffhanger, no less. But you can see that even with a slightly more cartoonish art style, you can still have a good story. So if they wanted to have an art style that was a little cheaper and a little easier to animate, I'm fine with that. And everyone's fine with that. Not everything has to be, like, super gorgeously detailed because, that's expensive and time-consuming. But when that same level of cheapness is applied to everything, if there's no real passion for Thundercats. This is just, we're gonna make another gag comedy show. We just slap the Thundercats logo on it. There's no point. You might if you wanted just to pick something to appeal to kids, you just want to make a goofy gag comedy, make your own show. If this was its own unique show, and it had the same style of comedy and the same art style, it wouldn't really be getting as much of a flack as it is now, because it would have been its own thing and no one would be expecting Thundercats. But that would require more creativity than just slapping on characters from the old show and going, good enough. You don't have to create your own characters. You just put out bad fan fiction and sure, yeah, it'll be made into an actual professional show. So yeah, in summary, in conclusion of all of this, when you're dealing with reboots and sequels, you do have to understand why people liked it in the first place, and you have to make it better. It's very simple. Make it better, put in the effort, put in the work, and you will get, a better result. Now, there are some things like Thundercats 2011 getting screwed by the network, and Spectacular Spider-Man getting screwed by the network, and Green Lantern the Animated Series getting screwed by the network. You have all those issues, but those are separate from the actual quality of the shows. You actually have good shows that people really love. So even if it does get canceled, you will still have people who love them to this day. Like, people still love Green Lantern Animated Series, even though it got unfairly canceled. People still like Spectacular Spider-Man, even though it got unfairly canceled. You can still have, it should be good, you should be wanting to do good and not just hitting the lowest common denominator just because you know that the network will give you more seasons. Because that's literally just selling out. And it's like, I understand some people need a paycheck, but when you're putting out crap, like, I can understand how anyone who's creative and like an animator or a writer would find that at all satisfying. And I would just say, always strive to do better. Always strive to do good. Don't rest on your laurels or hit the lowest common denominator just because you know you can get away with it. And if, they actually put effort into Thundercats Roar, I wouldn't have as much of an issue with it. If they put real effort into Teen Titans Go to make that good, I wouldn't have as much of an issue with it. But they don't. And we end up with cheap cash-ins. And that's a problem. Cash-ins are a problem. And no one wants a cash-in sequel. No one wants a cash-in reboot. There will be people who will see it, and it might even make money, but just because it makes money doesn't mean it's good. So, yeah. Always put in the effort, and this is something that I really have to say, that you can see this with Voltron. It's achieved success without being screwed by the network, because it's on Netflix. You can see that success has paid off. That work and that effort has paid off. And with DuckTales, you see that work and effort has paid off. And even after a bunch of hiatuses, DuckTales is still loved, and people are still tuning into DuckTales. That shows that it has a really strong fan base. And when you put in the effort, you can get that. So, I think that about wraps it up. I think I've talked about this is long enough. So, if you want to comment, if you want to submit a topic to me, you can either comment below if you're on YouTube, or if you're on Tumblr, send me an ask and do topic : then whatever topic you want me to talk about. Just make sure to follow the rules I'll be posting down below. If you want to watch last week's topic video, you can check that out here. If you want to watch next week's topic video, you can check that out here when I get that done. So if there's anything else you want to talk about, anything else you want to comment about reboots or sequels that you want to talk about, just comment below. And thank you for watching.